I'd say positioning-wise, it does look like you're
I look slightly demonic.
I'm slightly disappointed that there's no blonde perm.
That I was considering a blonde perm with sort
and
of
the meringue dress, the big pink dress. Hello and welcome to Talking About. We are talking about Series 1 of TV's Doctor Who, the comeback with Christopher Eccleston and Billie Piper. Ooh. Don't forget, you can like us, subscribe to us, notify us. I don't know. Probably lots of things you can do on this. You can report us for bad behaviour or something. Don't flag it as inappropriate. I am Paula P-Bal. I am from 1953 and I'm joined by...
hello, it's James.
And hello, it's Jason.
Hey, I remember you being born in 1953, Jason.
I wasn't born in 1953. Let me get this
Sorry, 33. I think you missed it, did you?
18? Anyway,
rude.
Previously on Doctor Who and Series 1, talking about, I mean, it's been going on for years now. It's been longer. We had a new low last week. The long game is now at the bottom on 16 points, and it's stacked underneath The End of the World, The Aliens of London, Rose, The Unquiet Dead, and top of the tree on 26 is Doctor Who and the Dalek Singular. All to play for. There are still more stories to come. We've got 4, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Oh, yeah. I can do counting and everything. I'm like a grown-up. Today, we are looking at Doctor Who and the Father's Day. Which is probably why I'm dressed like a... That's why I'm dressed like a daddy, folks. That is what that's all about.
I was about to say, Daddy!
Hang on, this is how the rumours start.
I don't mind. If anyone is feeling low, they can call me daddy. That's fine. Who has an introduction for this episode? It's got to be Jason, because it was James last time, I feel sure.
Well, I'm more than happy to introduce us into this story. Can I just say before I do, James, you're looking very horny over there, I have to say.
I beg your pardon.
I notice you have some horns there.
Yeah, I had my hair cut and now my ears show a little bit more. What are you talking about?
It's a bit like Nord in Doctor Who in The Greatest Show of the Galaxy, isn't it?
Yes, very good, James. I love it.
You should be worried with this story, Jason. You are the oldest thing in the room, so be careful.
At any moment.
If I actually suddenly am not here and it
we
flicks
won't
back
know.
to me, will anyone notice? That's the question. I don't think anyone will. Okay, Doctor Who and the Father's Day, as our wonderful voiceover proclaimed at the start of this. And we are launching ourselves back to the 1980s. Following on from the previous story, the Doctor and Rose travel back in time for, I think, what is quite an interesting concept in this story, to go back to a fixed point in time and actually effectively see the day that her father died. And it sets up an interesting story from that point, where you end up with a Rose can't quite help but interfere a little bit with the fixed point in time, and she then manages to save her father from dying, and all hell breaks loose with time. It's a very it's a difficult story, actually, but it's a very interesting concept, and surprisingly something that really hadn't been done a huge amount in Doctor Who at all, from memory, unless anybody can correct me. Of course, you can add your comments in. I'm sure the oracles on the other screens here will, I'm sure, no doubt be telling me that I'm wrong on that. But I think this is the first time we actually do something like this in Doctor Who history. And it throws up a concept, doesn't it? You know, we're always told that the Doctor can't meddle in time whatsoever throughout the course of the series that we have. And this is one moment where actually it does, even down to the point where, for some inexplicable reason, there's no innards to the TARDIS. But it builds to a really good story. It brings back, obviously, the recurring characters, that we'd seen previously. And what we end up with is, I think, a really interesting exploration here. So, plenty to talk about in this one.
Ooh. I think throughout, I mean, even from the sort of Hartnell era, this discussion about fixed points in time and how they cannot be changed. I think you're right. This is the first time that is necessarily something is directly changed and you see the consequence of it. I think for me, this continues some of the themes that we've talked about in previous stories. So this time you're seeing things through Pete's eyes. So you have a situation a bit later on where the Doctor is taken out of the picture and it is Pete that has to put everything together and realize what he needs to do to save the day. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. We talked in the last episode about how Adam's actions had, basically ended up with him being kicked off the TARDIS. And here you have Rose doing a similar sort of thing, not necessarily to profit by it, but, you have that lovely setup. And I think this story is one of the stories that really signifies how good Russell T Davies is around the characterization and building the story up. And you have Jackie telling the story to a young Rose about her father and how he died. And Rose has this sort of almost like a fairy tale image of her father and what he was like. And then you see her at this moment where the Doctor takes her back. And again, you could have a discussion about whether or not that's a very nice thing to do or quite a horrific thing to do, to go and see your own father killed, run down. But then she does the very human.
Sorry, I think the thing with Rose there is that she doesn't want to see him die, is that he died on his own and she didn't want him to die on his own. I think that's the because just say, I want to see my dad die would be dark. But I think she didn't want him to die on his own. I think that was
I think it's still quite a difficult thing to do, to take someone back to that moment where he's about to die. And she obviously, you have this scene where she bottles it the first time, and then the second time she decides that she's going to save him. And it is a very human thing to do, a very snap decision to say, right, I've got this opportunity. I'm probably, he says we can't do this again, so she's under that kind of like, this is your only chance to do this, and runs out and saves him. And then you see how actually her parents weren't this fairy tale that she'd been led to believe. Her dad's kind of a wheeler dealer. There's brilliant point where they're talking about how he ended up underneath a pile of clothes with someone working in a nightclub or something, and she's like, well, what were you doing? There's those sort of moments where she starts to question what he was really like and what Jackie had said. And and this is the story. I remember when this first went out, this was the story after Dalek, which was, great for lots of different reasons. This was the story that really made me feel for a scenario in Doctor Who. This is a really emotional one. The very end piece, the bit where Pete realizes that the car's in a loop and actually he was supposed to die and Rose is his daughter. I still even now get goosebumps when I watch this episode where he pieces it all together and realizes what he's got to do. And I think it's really well crafted story that pulls on all the sort of emotional strings, but also has got great performances from the cast in this. I think they, Christopher Eccleston isn't in it as much, but the ensemble cast are brilliant. I can't fault any of their performances in this. I
suppose it's quite a human trait, isn't it? And it's something exposed explored here to when someone dies, and I can think of example, but people die, they're sort of depends how they are and all of that, but you can sort of saint someone sometimes. I think memory itself is a funny old thing, but I mean, you can believe in a situation like this where the dad's been killed in a car accident, that you wouldn't be like growing up saying, do you remember when your dad was sleeping with someone he didn't know under a pilot? Do you remember when that wouldn't be the picture you'd want to remember? And I think it's a very human thing, I suppose, to just build on the positive, and I suppose this is a sort of exploration of that effect of not making someone to a saint, but expanding into a belief system that if you were to go back and go, they're just a real, and the thing is, he's just a real person, and that's what this shows. It doesn't. Is like when he there's the lovely scene, isn't there, where he's like, "Am I a good dad?" And she goes, "Yeah, you took us to the park. You were always there." And he's just like that. That's just not me. That just isn't me. He knows she's making it up, because that's the idea that she's made. She's taken this person who hasn't been part of her life and made it, and it's beautifully done. The interesting thing I felt with this one is I can remember watching it the first time, and it absolutely slaughtered me. I can remember coming down, and they're like, "I thought you were watching Doctor Who." It's like, "Oh, it was all right," and all that sort of stuff. And it didn't this time, and I think the reason it didn't is, spoiler alert, is I know that she gets her dad back, alternative worlds or whatever, next year. So I don't know whether watching it the first time, I was like, this is the conclusion here. We see her lose her dad and it's closed. Whereas I know she gets alternative world back and her mum and that situation. So I don't know whether I lost some of the impact, future knowledge that I wouldn't have had if I were reacting to this for the first time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I was the same. I was very teary-eyed at the end, and it is, when they cut to Jackie retelling the story and then saying, but he wasn't on his own. There was a young girl with him, and again, this is another one of those ripples that you're going to get a payoff for later on in the series, because they come back to this exact moment when Rose is talking to Jackie. I still feel the emotional side, not as much. I think for me, this is the story that always stood out for series one, because of that dynamic and the emotion and the way the story unfolds, the way that you discover more about the kind of person Pete is, the marriage that they had, and it's so relatable, it's so believable. When you see them arguing at the church, and the sort of bickering, and we know that Jackie's quite a feisty character anyway, but you see them really sort of at it, it was sniping at each other. But then later on, you see the love they have, because when they realize that Rose is their daughter, and it takes Jackie a while to get to that point, there is that sort of like, it all comes together, and they kind of forget the fact that all of the bickering and the sniping and everything, and he just says, look after her. So I think you have him go through this sort of thing of being, this dream, of what she thinks her father is, the reality of what he actually is. But then the moment where he becomes that fairy tale, where he sacrifices himself to save the world, and bearing in mind that in all of that, you had the Doctor, ended up, Rose touched her, her younger self and created another, fracture in time, and then the Doctor was killed. So you have, she's already lost that one sort of figure that would normally come in and save the day, and then suddenly her father steps up and he's the one that saves the day. And there's this, there's a brilliant moment again where he dies, and then the doctor appears, like literally, split second later, puts his hand on her shoulder and goes, "Go to him," because he's reset everything in just that moment where he walks out in front of, he picks up the vase, he walks out in front of that car, he resets everything, and the doctor just appears and says, "Go to him." And I still get really emotional about that point where he's saved everybody. He's put history back to how it should be, corrected Rose's mistake, and Rose has now got the opportunity to do what she originally wanted to do, which was to be with her father, for her father to be with someone at the end. And I think it plays on so many different human emotions, and just has so many different levels that every time I watch it, there's always something else I pick up on and I go, it's just hard. It's a really, really good story.
And I think also we because again, I know that there was quite a vocal part of the Doctor Who fandom that didn't like the domestic setup, and they also didn't gel with the Jackie character. I mean, I think the gays took her on straight away, but I think there was quite a
100%.
wider crowd that were probably less enamored with the character. But each time she comes back, there's a bit more. There's another layer, and it just keeps going. And you can see where she's come from. You can see the fire and the feist, and lots of lovely character bits. And Doctor Who gets to tell her to shut up and do as she's told. That's a great moment. But it is that thing, because I think, again, and a lot of it does come down to performance as well. I mean, it's great writing. I'm not saying it's all right, but a lot of it comes down to performance, because there's a lot of very subtle things going on there. Because she isn't the brash blonde airhead that you would just take at first glance. She's actually very strong, and she's actually thinking it all through. And I think because she's so used to Pete doing things and so used to being cheated on and all that stuff, that's her instant reaction, is that he's turned up with a young blonde. That's who it's going to be. I mean, he gets there quicker at realizing that it's Rose, but that doesn't mean that she's sort of slow in this. It just means that's literally, she's so built against that because she's so used to what she's got that it takes a while to get there.
And of course, you can't not comment on the perm. The perm is just of its day, isn't it?
And there is the lovely scene, isn't there, where she just looks, never seen your hair like that before.
It's the meringue and the 80s peach and stuff. It is really, not necessarily a period drama, if you like, but you can see, the decade that you're in as soon as you see. Well,
it's 40 years ago now, isn't it? Near enough. So it's fairly period.
That is scary when you think that is 40 years ago, isn't it?
That is like as far ago now as like the sort of Second World War would have been then. So it's kind of
yes.
Don't upset everyone at home now. But 80s is definitely something that is period, I'm afraid.
But I pick up on a point you've just made, which is obviously you were right. There was a vocal element of fandom back in the day that didn't like this setup with having the sort of more earthbound sort of almost building it back or putting a foundation of family in there. But I think it was the twist in Doctor Who that was needed to bring back the program, to give it something a little bit different. If you just brought back a reincarnation of the original series and put that back on screen in 2005, would it have been as popular? Probably not. So I think it did need to come at it at a slightly different angle. And I think giving us more of that personality of the companion, the sort of background of the family, I think it was an interesting dynamic, and it pays off massively in this story, because you really are getting that sort of backstory, that history. You care about these characters. You care about Pete. And actually, there's a part of you during the watching of the episode, you kind of want Time never to go back to what it was, so that she does get the father that she didn't have. So it plays well, I think, and gives us that sort of other side of Doctor Who that we probably didn't or hadn't had previously. And I think that's part of what makes this story in particular stand out for this season, is that I think, for me, the family is cemented into the storyline now. We've had several building stories. The background is built. The characters are there, but this is where you really bring the family properly to life. Even little Mickey in the church. It's cementing that scene that we've got and we'll have for another couple of seasons to come. So yeah, for me, this is, I think that's one of the defining successes of this particular episode.
Yeah, I think Sean's a great performance. Actually, he's a good actor. I think he should do it professionally. But yeah, Sean does a good performance in this. But I mean, equally, I sort of again I come back to the whole small parts still having big characters. Even everyone at the church, there's a lot of sort of defined setups. On the father on the mobile phone, the couple getting married, and she's pregnant, and all. There's lots of just bits of stuff, but there's enough in the characters that you know what the setups are, and you can know that they're not faceless. I think it's very easy, as we have seen, to have groups of people where it's a faceless thing, and you don't really care if they wipe the lot out, and I think you care about the situation. The negative point, because I think I should always go on a negative. The monsters, which I gather upstairs at the BBC said we want more monsters in this. Don't entirely. There's nothing wrong with them, and they're nicely realised, and all that. It just feels like you've got monsters in it because there isn't quite. And I guess if upstairs the BBC say, look, get in more monsters, you get in more monsters. But it does feel like that just comes down to a sort of slight lack of confidence in saying, this week we're not having a monster, we're just dealing with this.
Because you could have had time distorting itself with just an effect rather than a monster. Because there's enough story being built, the car constantly coming around the corner, the fact that time is fractured, it's splitting off. There are enough visual cues here. And we don't know enough about the monsters. We don't learn enough about the monsters. We don't know entirely why they're there. We know there's something to do with time, but it's not really properly explained. And you're right, I don't think they are needed. Personally, you're right, I think they're realized well for the day. For me, I think some of the long shots where they're attacking the church and some of it, they do look a little bit computer generated for my liking now, if I was to be critical of the visual effects in this particular episode. But this one didn't need it. This was a character-based episode. And you were relying on the story, and it didn't need it this time.
I don't mind them too much. I mean, they're not referred to as Reapers in the episode, but I think afterwards they were named Reapers when they brought the character options out. I think there was one of these, and I think there was.
It was a bigger toy, and I got it half price at Argos because I don't think it was a popular toy.
Yeah, and I think it was on the cards as well, the trading cards. They were called the Reapers, and I think there's a line where Chris Eccleston says, the Time Lords would have fixed this, but they're not there anymore. And then the Reapers come along, and they're kind of, I think he describes them as like trying to sterilize the the wound, but actually they're just killing everything off in age order or whatever it is that he says. I think I don't mind them. I think they're a nice bit of peril, if you like. It seems a bit weird that he goes through that whole thing of like the TARDIS is, and I like the point where he walks up to the TARDIS and opens it and there's nothing there. I like that point. I think that's a real sort of like, the Doctor can't just nip back in time and fix it. He's stuck in this, situation because of Rose. But then he's got that thing where he uses the mobile phone battery and the key to sort of regenerate a TARDIS, and you have all of that going on. But here's the thing, and probably talk about this more in later stories. I get very frustrated with Russell T Davies endings sometimes, how everything could be fixed in just a blink of an eye because of some whiz bang thing that happens. And this is exactly the kind of thing where you would be like, oh, he's going to regenerate a new TARDIS from a phone battery and a key that he's never been able to do that before. But what I like is the fact that even that is then ruined by Rose because of Rose's actions in handling her younger self. It lets the Reaper into the church, which kills the Doctor and destroys the TARDIS. So I think, there is a I think there's a really clever way of suddenly you have this, miraculous way of the Doctor's going to save them because of this, and then they even take that away because of something that Rose has done. Everything that Rose does in this scenario makes things worse. So I think there is an element there that there is. You could say that they're not needed in the episode, but I think they don't detract for me from the episode. Yes, there is elements where they're climbing on the outside of the church, and you just think, why don't they just smash through a window? Or what is stopping them? They're devouring everything else. What is stopping them from getting into the church? But I think there is that sort of almost base under siege bit when they're in the church, where they are under threat from these things. I think is adequate.
I don't think it's terribly clear what happens with the TARDIS, is it? I mean, the Reapers are presumably, if the Reapers had eaten it, they'd have taken the box, wouldn't they? They wouldn't have just sucked the innards out.
He was like, I don't know, he was doing something with the key to bring the TARDIS back together, and then the Reaper hit the key and
I meant before, when the TARDIS wasn't. When it just becomes a box. I mean, I can see that on paper it's one of those pull-out things. And Doctor goes back to the TARDIS, and it's just a box, and that's quite a good, it's a good line, and it's a good shot, and it's a good moment. I'm not sure if the Reapers were sucking things out, they'd have taken the whole box rather than than just left the shell would be part of the.
Originally, he was going to open the box, and the box was going to fall apart. It was, rather than just be empty, it was going to just break apart and just fall into pieces. But
it's the same problem, though, my love. It's the same problem.
It's still not explained, and I think I said that in my intro. There isn't a reason given primarily for it. It becomes an interesting plot device because they try and effectively regenerate the TARDIS, but you're not expecting it. So there's a visual impact of the doors opening and there's an empty box. I've not really seen that before. But why? I'm still not clear.
I think the lazy way out would be the Doctor goes back and stops Rose from running out in front of the car. So the Doctor's trapped in that situation. He can't go back and change anything.
No, but it doesn't explain why it's as a plot reason not to go back. That makes sense that he can't just get in the TARDIS and fix everything. But it doesn't make sense as to why the TARDIS isn't there.
Yeah,
time's generally going a bit wrong, I think, is that's why the radio goes funny and it stops playing Rick Astley and all that sort of stuff. We could have had a bit more Rick rolling, couldn't we, in the car? But no, denied. So I don't know. There are a couple of bits but I think it's in some ways you forgive that more because you're invested in the human plot. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we've had very hokey main plots and no investment in the characters either. So if you have one or the other, you usually one will balance the other out, and you won't. I mean, I don't know how many times I've watched Father's Day now. First time I watched it, I didn't get to the end and go, oh, what about the TARDIS? What was that all about? So it's having watched it enough times now to go, that is slightly strange, and it smells like something that's been lost in successive drafts. That the first draft, it probably made a lot of sense. Then progressively, something's been pulled out and something else has gone, and it makes less sense. Wait for the Target book.
Yeah. And I go back to a comment you made, James, I think, which was around the fact that, the stories are resolved very, very quickly. We have a habit now in this era of the show that everything is fixed and put right in a couple of minutes just at the back end of the episode. But that is entirely, for me, it's not driven by the showrunner of the day. It's driven by the format, and I think the change in the format here, where we had 4 25-minute episodes, we've got 45 to tell a story, and unfortunately, one of the symptoms of this type of television and storytelling is that you will, I'm afraid, get that very sort of almost rushed and incomplete ending to a story. It didn't need to be, but because they've got so much to try and put into the 45 minutes, something gives, and most often or not, and in a number of years of the new series, not just Russell's era, but into Moffat and so on and so forth, the endings are often cop-outs because budget and time defeats them essentially in the storytelling.
Yeah, but and we will talk about that as we go further forward. But in this, it's not. I don't feel that it is rushed. I feel that there is a build up to it as he keeps seeing the car go around the church. As he has the conversation with Rose, as he's piecing everything together as to what's happened, and
But there is only one ending, and that's the only way that you can end this particular installment is by fulfilling the prophecy of the story.
I don't think we've had, other than Doctor Who and the Rose, I think thus far, all the endings have been they've all made sense within the sphere of the story. Doctor and the Rose is a bit of a cop-out because here's my bottle of anti-plastic. I think that's sort of forgivable because you've got to introduce so many things in that first episode, and the TARDIS and the Time Lord and all that. There's just everything to get into 40 minutes. So you've kind of got to get rid of your villain of the week quite quickly. I don't think we've had that thus far. I mean, towards the end of the season, we do get the reset and all that sort of stuff. It's difficult in some ways, and I suppose something we'll discuss more going onwards, but it's part of having a fantastical world in this sort of thing, isn't it? In that Doctor Who deals with things on like a global sort of an invasion or whatever, and if the world's about to be destroyed by aliens or something like that, everyone in the world would know that, and then if that didn't happen and then they were defeated, things would change within that world. I know they will do that, you didn't care about the Yetis in the underground and all that sort of, it's kind of like, yes, but in real terms, every time the end of the world came through the Master or the Cybermen, the Dies Destroy, all that sort of stuff, it would have a repercussion, and the world would change with it. And I suppose the problem is you can't stop the end of the world or have the end of the world every week without in some ways doing your magical reset, because you've got to set it back to the point where it's relatable and it's a normal setup.
No, I'd agree.
I have a feeling this is something we will come back to on a number of occasions.
It's like Mystic Meg, and he's like Mystic Meg. Do we have any exciting facts on Doctor Who and the Father's Day?
Let's go through a couple. On this one, the Bad Wolf, in this instance, the reference comes from a poster in the foreground. Billie Piper said this is her favourite episode. This is the one that she liked. Jason there, just going checking the dark web as I explain all these things.
I love it. It's like spoilers to me. I can read them in advance. I love it.
There was, at the time, Christopher Eccleston's father was ill, so there was a sort of backup plan that he would be written out of the story earlier than he actually is in this one, in case he had to go. He was doing like visits to his father while he was filming, but they planned a contingency that the Doctor's departure from the story would have happened a bit earlier on. Paul Cornell said that Pete was based loosely around his own father and his sort of memories of his father when he was growing up. There was originally Pete was supposed to take a swig from a glass of wine before he ran out in front of the car, but they decided that would be the wrong image to portray, that you needed an alcoholic drink to be brave. How can that be the wrong image? Please don't throw yourself out in front of a car, Jason, while you're drinking your pints. But yeah, that was it for me.
That concludes the televote. Okay. Are we going to go put some scores on the doors?
Oh,
Anyone out there?
I see this as James's to set us off this time.
all right. I'm going to be very honest in the fact that this was my favourite story from this series, and over the last few years, that mantle has been taken by another story. So it's a really difficult one because
You're going to be telling me it's Flux.
No.
Flux isn't in this season, you mad old tart.
That's okay. That's all right.
There is another sort of story in this series that I actually like a fraction more now than this one. This is all, I said I'm going to be very honest. I'm not going to say which one it is.
Okay.
And I think this is so it's really difficult. So I am going to be really contentious, and I'm going to give this 9.5 because I genuinely love this story, but there is another story that I feel may deserve.
So you're scoring this one down in favour of that story because that story's better.
Well, no, Jason, what we tend to do is if we like one more than the other one, we score it higher. And if we dislike it, we score it lower. So that what happens is that when it comes to the scoring, if someone says, I think this is mediocre and I give it 8, then what happens is that you don't go, well, hang on, the one you really liked said was your favourite, you gave 4 points to.
When we get to it, I will explain. But I'm giving this 9.5.
Dear viewer, if we had a Jason cam on now, it would have a big huff on the bottom of it.
I'm not, because I am unique in the way that I score, and I will continue to be the Shirley Ballas of the scoring world here in this scenario.
You do you, Jason.
I will indeed. I will always and continue to do so. I can't wait to see which story it is, though, James, I have to say.
I'm going to keep you in tenterhooks for that one.
No, I can't wait. I'm bated breath here for it. Okay, so I'll do my roundup of the score on this one. This is actually, a step up, and it is a difficult story to tell, and I think that mostly it's done very, very well. It's great that we get that sort of background to Rose and the family, but I'm buying into the fact that this really is a character driven, and for me, I think there are a few bits where the boat has been pushed out a little, and we've talked about it as we've come through this. The monster of the week is a little bit superfluous to the story, and therefore, the story could have been told, I think, without the inclusion. And I think the characters were carrying this by far on their own. Script is really strong in this one. And it's certainly one of the higher rated stories of the season for me. And with that in mind, I am going to give Father's Day a very, very respectable 9.
I could almost see him shaking his magic 8-ball, waiting for a score to come up.
At least you're hoping it's the magic 8-ball that he's shaking.
That's rude. Rude, I tell you. And I don't know if I've got another story, because I'm not going to give my spoilers away if there's another story that scores higher than that just yet.
What he means, dear viewer, is he's not watched the rest of the season, so he doesn't remember what's coming next.
I like to bite these off in small chunks and go boop, 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 and watch as we go. I am not going to do the entire season and then talk about it, because I'm going to just take it on how I would have watched it back in the day, once a week. There you go. Thank you very much.
What, drunk on a sofa with a stranger?
I mean, there's not enough times I can say the word rude for that.
Facts is facts, folks. You better believe it.
Hashtag spoilers.
Hashtag soilers, more like.
Oh, behave yourself.
Anyway, if anyone's having their breakfast, I do apologise in advance.
We do have some people who are eating their breakfast while these are going out.
It's really difficult because I did really like, I'm not saying I don't like it now, I did really, really like this. And so when I was coming to watch it, I was bracing myself for really liking it. Just keep saying the word liking over and over here because it's very eloquent. And the interesting thing was I didn't dislike it. I just didn't get punctured by it. And literally, as I said earlier, I can remember the first time watching it and being really thumped by it. And then subsequent watchings, finding it difficult to watch because I found it a very emotional watch. And I can't, my head says into one score, but then I sort of go, in real terms, if I were to watch it again tomorrow, I know what my reaction would be now. So actually, it's slightly dulled its impact with me with time. Not to say it's bad in any way, but just it's lessened in my estimations, maybe, because I think it's the subsequent knowledge. I literally think it's the knowledge of the full story now and knowing how the arc works. And it's difficult because you should be scoring it in the context and how this runs and how this is, and I get that. But the thump of this is that this is Rose's only encounter with her dad, and this is the end of that storyline. You know, that's, I think, the big hit on this. And if you don't have that as the big hit, it lessens some of the impact, I think. Which means for me, I came in on a 7.5.
Ooh.
Well, that's not low. You gave a mediocre 6 points. That's all I'm saying. 7.5 out of 10 is quite high. I think an average score is a 5. Anything above that is above average. So I think 7.5 is fine.
I was just, I don't know if I wasn't expecting just a slightly higher score to it from you on it, but I mean, that's everyone scores in the way that they score.
Yes, they do. I'm doing me.
And I like
I was going to
that.
say, you score you.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. So, drum roll. That actually, twin dilemma here. It's scored more than the twin dilemma for clarity. That brings Doctor Who and the Father's Day in on 26 points, which, dear viewer, means it's tied with Dalek right now.
Oh, I like
yes, okay. Yes, that is interesting.
That's Jeopardy for you.
That's a double pinnacle.
There are so many, but I think the long game was the pinnacle of low scoring last week.
Can I just point out to my fellow companions in this series that I've actually not said peak or pinnacle throughout this entire season so far. You are saying it all the time, though.
We're saying it as an affectionate mockery of your unusual use of the English language, I think. I think if Susie Dent sat next to you, she'd have a hemorrhage because she's like, what's he using this word for?
It's part of my patter.
You do you.
Absolutely, I'm going to.
Anyway, that was very enjoyable. And
it was.
He said 1 pint, ladies and gentlemen.
We don't know what that pint was, though. I think it was musty gin or something. We don't know. We don't know what goes in that glass. Remember, drink responsibly.
Absolutely. It's the excitement of spending an hour with you lovely people.
You tell how drunk he is. We've been recording about 7 hours now. It's not an hour. Anyway, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yes, indeed. A pleasure as always.
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh dear, we need the clicks back now, don't we? We need the clicks. Anyway, thank you very much. Like us, subscribe to us, write things down below, and we'll see you soon.